Yeah, cables drawn like guitar strings, humming low. The East River catching every single glow. From the skyline, standing tall like it's on trial. I've been crossing this bridge for a long, long while. Midnight lanes are empty just the way I like. Yellow paint reflecting off the city spike of ambition and exhaustion, hand in hand. This is something tourists never understand. You gotta drive it when the world is fast asleep, when the only toll is promises you keep to yourself at 2 a.m. with no one near, just the engine and the absence of the fear. Brooklyn Bridge, stone and wire and fate, 100 years of holding weight. Every cable, every boat, every frozen breath, connecting life to life over depth. And I drive it like a prayer. I don't know the words to, but the melody is enough. Yeah. Manhattan pulls me with its golden magnetic teeth, but Brooklyn's where I find the ground beneath my feet, my wheels, my sense of home. The brownstone blocks where I don't need my phone to feel connected to the frequency of something real. Bodegas that remember how you feel about your coffee and your lottery and your day. The corner store that always knows what to say. On this side, the avenues are wider than the egos. The playgrounds echo with the spirits of the people who built this Boardwalk brick by immigrant brick. When Manhattan told them they were too thick, too loud, too dark, too different, too much, Brooklyn said, come here, I've got the touch. Brooklyn Bridge, stone and wire fate, 100 years of holding weight. Every cable, every boat, every frozen breath, connecting life to life over depth. And I drive it like a prayer. I don't know the words to, but the melody is enough. Yeah, yeah. The wooden planks beneath the walkway still remember. Every January, every hot September. Feet of strangers finding their way across, calculating the profit and the loss of leaving one life for another shore and deciding what the other side is for. I think it's for the drive back when you realize where you started was where you wanted to be all along. Just holds you either way. No judgment in the cables, no opinion in a stone. Just the quiet work of getting you home.
Jerk chicken smoke mixing with the evening cold. Flatbush Avenue got a million stories told in patois and in Creole and in Brooklyn slang. Every restaurant a different bell that rang when the immigration wave came crashing down and painted every corner of this part of town with flavors you can smell from half a block away. The kind that make a Tuesday feel like Saturday. Dollar vans are racing me down to the junction. Every pothole serving this essential function of reminding you that this ain't Park Slope smooth. Flatbush got a different kind of groove, the kind that lives inside your chest, the kind that won't let Sunday rest without a plate of rice and peas and someone's grandmother saying please sit down, eat more, you're way too thin. And that's how every week begins. This is the avenue that raised the bass, put the rhythm in the city's face. Before the brunch spots claimed the space, before the bike lanes tried to replace what was already perfect in its own way. Flatbush had its golden day, and I'm here to tell you that it stayed. It never really went away, it just got louder. A grandmother crosses Grand Army Plaza slow, and every single driver seems to know that you wait. You don't honk, you don't flash, you don't sigh. Some things in Brooklyn you don't question why. The church on the corner's got a Wednesday service. The beauty shop next door is full of purpose. Hair braided tight like the community ties that hold this avenue between the highs and lows of a city that keeps changing face, but Flatbush keeps its own pace. The Botanic Gardens at the top of the hill, where the cherry blossoms have their annual thrill. But down here at street level, the flowers are different. They bloom in restaurant windows and they're magnificent in ways that no museum could contain. Flatbush Avenue is its own domain. This is the avenue that raised the bass, put the rhythm in the city's face, yeah. Before the brunch spots claim the space, before the bike lanes try to replace what was already perfect in its own way. Flatbush had its golden day, and I'm here to tell you that it stayed. It never really went away, it just got louder. They keep writing think piece about what Brooklyn lost, calculating the cultural cost of every new condo, every artisan toast. But they never asked the people on this post, this avenue, this heartbeat, this proof that the soul of a place lives underneath the roof of every family that refused to leave, every shop that chose to believe that the neighborhood is worth the fight. And I drive through it every night just to feel that they were right, and they were, they always were. Roll the windows down and let the culture in.
Say the BQE is the worst highway in America. I say she's just misunderstood.
3 lanes pretending to be 5 on a good day. Construction cones been here since JFK. We're still alive, or so the rumor goes. This highway is the city's running nose. Always congested, never fully healed. A wound that Robert Moses never sealed. But here's the thing about the BQE at night. When the trucks are parked and the lanes are tight but empty, she transforms into this ribbon of concrete, almost hit or miss. Beautiful depending on the angle that you take and the number of mistakes you're willing to make. At 60 miles an hour with no guardrail fade, just the Brooklyn skyline keeping you safe. I hate this road the way you hate the song you sing when it's too late to pretend you don't know every word. The BQE is the most absurd, most broken, most honest thing this city ever built, and I keep driving. The promenade is right above my head, where the brownstone Brooklyn lovers tread, with views that cost a couple million flat. Meanwhile, I'm down here dodging the combat with a pie hole that could swallow a sedan, and a merge lane shorter than attention span of a city that forgot this road exists until they're stuck on it with clenched up fists. But at 2 a.m. the Kosciuszko curve reveals Manhattan like a dealer showing what he deals. The whole hand spread across the river's face, diamonds everywhere you look this place. This broken beaten highway is a gallery of everything New York does accidentally, beautifully and without a single care for the drivers and the axles and the prayer. I hate this road the way you hate a song you sing when it's too late to pretend you don't know every word. The BQE is the most absurd, most broken, most honest thing this city ever built, and I keep driving. I'll take a pothole over any other city's smooth highway, because at least the BQE never lied about what she was.
night. And Bedford Avenue breeze, the kind of quiet that the neighborhood rarely receives. Every flannel, every fixie tucked away inside. The cold won the battle and the streets are mine to ride. I take it slow past the vintage shops with their gates pulled down. Past a mural of a woman wearing Brooklyn like a crown. The record store on Berry still has one light on, spinning something vinyl, something warm, something gone that I can almost hear through my closed window glass. A melody that belongs to a different Williamsburg past. Before the algorithms found this zip code's vibe, before the influencers made it their tribe, there was just a bridge and a neighborhood that tried to make art affordable on the waterfront side. Go slow through the Tuesday version of this place, the one that doesn't perform or keep pace with whatever the weekend demands. Go slow and you'll feel it in your hands on the steering wheel, a frequency that only plays for those who drive with no urgency. The waterfront apartments glow like aquariums, full of people living in their own terrariums of curated shelves and Edison bulbs. But the East River underneath still pulses with the current that was here before the condos came, before anyone could even spell this neighborhood's name. It carried ice and sewage and the dreams of a city that was too busy being tough to ever feel pretty. And now it carries the reflection of $1 billion view that somehow still looks beautiful when you're just passing through. 11 miles an hour on a Tuesday night with no one watching and no one to impress with your inside. Go slow through the Tuesday version of this place, the one that doesn't perform or keep pace with whatever the weekend demands. Go slow and you'll feel it in your hands on the steering wheel, a frequency that only plays for those who drive with no urgency. And the neighborhood whispers back only to those who are quiet enough to deserve it.
Yeah, the river's on my right like a confidant who's heard it all before and still won't want to interrupt the silence of the drive. FDR at midnight, barely alive, with traffic but alive with something else. The kind of energy the city only tells to those who drive the edge when no one's watching. The east side moving like a fever catching. From the Battery, the road begins its crawl past the seaport where the tall ships stall. And history like flies, trapped in amber. Wall Street sleeps inside its granite chamber. But down here, river level speed is king. And the merged lanes don't apologize for anything. Hug the island where the concrete meets the river, where Manhattan shows a side that makes you shiver. Not with Cobra, with the honesty of edges. The FDR's built on broken pledges and potholes that the city swears it'll fix, but we both know that's just politics. The UN building dark and diplomatically asleep. Gracie Mansion where the mayor pretends to count sheep. The hospital where someone's being born right now. Above the highway where I'm taking my bow of solitude and speeding. River air, the Harlem River waiting up ahead to share a different kind of New York than the postcard sell. One that smells like diesel and does very well without the tourists and the Broadway lights. The FDR belongs to the late night flights of fancy, from a driver going north to south, with the whole east side like a word in the city's mouth. Hug the island where the concrete meets the river, where Manhattan shows a side that makes you shiver. Not with Cobra, with the honesty of edges. The FDR is built on broken pledges and potholes Politics. 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 And I love her exactly the way she is. Finish. Unapologetic.
From the top of this hill I can see the harbor stretch. Every ship and every crane and every sketch of a skyline that belongs to somebody else. But the view belongs to everyone who felt the need to climb up here at closing time. When the park gates say tomorrow, but the climb was worth the last 10 minutes of the light. When the statue lifts her torch into the night, and the bench up here is cold and worn with years of couples and their promises and fears, of teenagers and their first cigarettes, of grandmothers watching sunsets without regrets. This is Sunset Park, the neighborhood, the hill, the place that teaches you to just sit still. Small hill, big view, a couple 100 feet of altitude, and suddenly the world makes sense from behind this chain link fence where Brooklyn ends and the harbor begins, and the only thing competing is the wind. Back in the car I rolled down 4th Avenue, where Chinatown and Mexican Town debut. They even special side by side in steam. Tuckerias and dumpling shops, living the dream of a borough where the world just shows up and figures out the seating and the coffee cup situation on its own without a host. This is Brooklyn and at its most democratic, most delicious, most alive. The part they don't put in the travel guide, but the part that keeps the city's heart supplied. Small hill, big view, a couple 100 feet of altitude, and suddenly the world makes sense from behind this chain link fence where Brooklyn ends and the harbor begins, and the only thing competing is the wind. And from up here, every neighborhood looks like it's holding hands.
Swallowed whole by yellow tile and fluorescent prayer. A mile of underground with nothing but the air. Recycled through a ventilation shaft cathedral. The Holland Tunnel is the most medieval piece of modern infrastructure that I know. You enter in the world above, let's go. My engine bounces off the walls and multiplies into a chorus of 1,000 other drives that happened here before in decades past. The tunnel treats the first car like the last. No favoritism underneath the riverbed, just forward motion and the quiet dread of knowing that above you right this instant 1,000,000 tons of water keeps its distance from your windshield by a margin engineering thin. And still you're driving, somehow that's a win. Not here, not there, suspended in the in-between, beneath the Hudson in the most surreal routine. A minute underground where nothing counts. No borough, no state, just the amount of trust you put in tile and steel and math to keep the river off your path. Yeah, New Jersey blinks at the other end like a neighbor. waving from across the kind of labor that it takes to live in one place, work another. Commuting through a tunnel like no other. But tonight I'm not commuting, I'm just here for the experience of disappearing. The middle of the tunnel is my favorite spot, where you're equidistant from the life you got and the life that's waiting on the other side. A perfect moment stripped of every pride and pretension, just a hummer being carried through the earth like something buried that still moves. Not here, not there, suspended in the in-between, beneath the Hudson in the most surreal routine. Emitting underground when nothing counts. No barrow, no stage, just the amount of trust you put in silence, still in that, to keep the river off your path. Yeah. Yeah. And every time I emerge on the other side, I feel like I've been baptized.
Uptown where the river bends like a dancer's back, where the brownstones crack with the weight of the track. Recurred this neighborhood set when the world was still listening. Jazz and gospel in the sweat that was glistening on the foreheads of musicians who invented the sound that every lo-fi beat is built on. That's the ground. You're driving on a night along the Harlem River edge, where the Bronx sits across the water like a pledge of solidarity between two boroughs who know the truth that the best music always comes from the uncouth, the unpolished, the unfinished, and the raw, the notes that no conservatory ever saw. So it wasn't born in a studio, it was born on these steps, where the rent was late but the music kept its promise to the neighborhood that raised it right. Harlem After Midnight is a masterclass in light. The way it falls on brownstone curves, the way it bends around the verbs of a language this community wrote. Every lyric, every note. The Apollo Marquis sits dark but dignified, like a veteran who doesn't need to testify about the battles and the glory days. Ella Sarah Vaughan in a million different ways to break a heart with nothing but a voice. This neighborhood was always about the choice to make beauty from whatever you were given and make it look like living. Yankee Stadium across the river sleeps in white, waiting for a summer that'll set the Bronx alight. But even now in winter from this drive, you can feel the whole of Uptown still alive in the steam from the manholes and the distant bass of someone's speaker rattling the window space. So it wasn't born in a studio, it was born on these steps, where the rent was late but the music kept its promise to the neighborhood that raised it right. Harlem After Midnight is a masterclass in light. The way it falls on brownstone curves, the way it bends around the verse of a language this community wrote. Every lyric, every note, and the river carries a melody all the way to the sea, where it mixes with every other song. This city set free.
42nd Street, the intersection of ambition and exhaustion. A billion pixels per square inch of sky, enough wattage to make the stars feel shy. I exit here sometimes just to confirm that the center of the universe can squirm. With tourists who've been standing still so long, their shadows left without them heading strong toward Times Square, where everything's for sale, including the illusion of a fairy tale. But one block east, the volume drops to half, and 2 blocks east, you hear the city laugh at itself for thinking that the brightest spot was ever worth the parking lot, or the $15 water, or the chain restaurant experience of the mundane, dressed up in LED and calling it a view when the real New York York is just a block or two away.
I don't stop, I just slow down and stare, like watching someone else's nightmare. Beautiful and terrifying and loud, the loneliest place in the biggest crowd. And then I turn the wheel and disappear into the streets that no one comes here for. The quiet ones, the residential ones, where the light is just the moon and what it does.
Broadway stretches from the Battery to the Bronx, the longest avenue with the most paradox. At 42nd it screams its loudest note, at 101st it clears its throat and speaks in brownstone, whispers to the trees. The same road, different vocabularies. I take Broadway north where no one follows, past the theaters, past the hollows of Midtown, into the upper digits where the buildings shrink and the sky gets bigger.
And the neon is replaced by something plain, a streetlight and the possibility of rain. I don't stop, I just slow down and stare, like watching someone else's nightmare. Beautiful and terrifying and loud, the loneliest place in the biggest crowd. And then I turn the wheel and disappear into the streets that no one comes here for. The quiet ones, the residential ones, where the light is just the moon and what it does. And the moon has never needed a billboard. No subway reaches Red Hook, that's the deal. You earn your way here behind the wheel, through the BQE underpass where the trucks still groan, into a neighborhood that holds its own against the tide of everything that Brooklyn became. Red Hook stayed Red Hook, refused the fame. Cobblestones that remember the horses in the dock, the loading bays that ran around the clock, feeding a city that was hungry for the world. Every crate of coffee, every textile unfurled, came through here through the hands of men who clocked in at 5 and clocked out at 10 and walked home to a view the rich would kill for, the Statue of Liberty framed in their windowsill floor. At the edge of the map where the borough forgets to pretend, where the cobblestones don't need to trend, the water tells the only truth worth hearing tonight, that the margin is where you find the light. The statue's torch is closer here than Midtown, and the silence wears a different kind of crown. IKEA came and people said it's over, but the key lime pie Steve's is still a 4-leaf clover. The ball feels still alive on summer Saturdays, with pupusas and the Caribbean haze of a community that didn't leave when it got hard. They just reshuffled every card and kept playing, kept building, kept standing on this pier, watching the container ship's career past Governor's Island into the harbor's mouth. The compass always pointing south toward the Narrows where the ocean starts, and Red Hook beats with the quietest heart. At the edge of the map where the borough forgets to pretend, where the cobblestones don't need to trend, the water tells the only truth worth hearing tonight, that the margin is where you find the light. The statue's torch is closer here than Midtown, and the silence wears a different kind of crown. And I come here every time the city gets too sure of itself, because Red Hook has the antidote, humility and salt water.
Hudson River doing what the Hudson always do. Just flowing south like it's got somewhere to be. Probably the harbor, probably the sea. Meanwhile, New Jersey's putting on its evening show of corporate logos and the chemical plant glow that somehow from this distance looks romantic. The West Side Highway makes everything Atlantic. The piers reach out like fingers from a giant's hand. Catching ferries, catching the last demand of joggers finishing the 10-mile vow. Sweat still steaming on that furrowed brow. The bike lane empty now belongs to no one. And the highway opens up its final lung. A space where you can breathe without a meter. Cruising 40 with the river as you heat up. This is my prescription. No copay, no referral. My therapist is the West Side Highway. Turning nocturnal. Chelsea Piers to Riverside. The session is an hour. And the Hudson is the only higher power. I believe in at this time of night, when the George Washington Bridge appears in sight like a crown on the city's northern head. The most expensive thing that's ever spread. Its arms and said, come through. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Its arms and said, come through. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, intrepid sits in retirement by the dock. An aircraft carrier learning how to walk the line between a weapon and a wonder. Kids in summer climbing up and under, but tonight she's just a shadow on the water. A grandmother with stories for a daughter about the wars and the waves and the wind, and the man who never came home again. I pass her doing 55 and salute. The way you're doing beauty is a mute conversation between present and the past. The West Side Highway always drives too fast to let you sit with any single thing, but slow enough to make you feel everything. This is my prescription. No copay, no referral. My therapist is the West Side Highway. Turning nocturnal. Chelsea Piers to Riverside. The session is an hour. And the Hudson is the only higher power. I believe in at this time of night, when the George Washington Bridge appears in sight like a crown on the city's northern head. The most expensive thing that's ever spread. Its arms and said, come through. Yeah. And I come through every time. The river knows my car by
Yaris kitchen on the second floor. Spent a couple degrees beneath the door. Seeping down the stairs into the street, where it meets the halal carts competing heat of lamb and rice and that mysterious white sauce that no one's ever successfully gotten across in any recipe. It only works right here on Steinway Street, between the braids and the beer. The N train shakes the ceiling every couple of minutes, an earthquake that this neighborhood has no limits for absorbing. You learn to pause your sentence, wait for the rumble to pay its penance, and pick up right where the thought left off, between the baklava and the pierogi so soft. You forget what country you're standing in, and that's the whole point, that's where Queens begins. This borough is the proof that strangers learn to share a roof, and the table always has an extra plate. Queens doesn't assimilate, it accumulates. Every flavor, every tongue, every grandmother's recipe, every song that's sung in a language that the neighbor doesn't speak, but understands because the smell of what you eat is the most universal sentence ever written. Astoria Park beneath the Triborough spread, where the old Greek men play cards until they're fed by their wives, who call them in like it's still Athens. And the Armenian bakery on Broadway fattens friends every morning with the scent of saffron bread that I follow like a golden thread through a neighborhood that reinvents itself every decade but keeps the same shelf of spices and the same doorbell sound of someone buzzing someone in the most democratic sound in town. This borough is the proof that strangers learn to share a roof, and the table always has an extra plate. Queens doesn't assimilate, it accumulates. Every flavor, every tongue, every grandmother's recipe, every song that's sung in a language that the neighbor doesn't speak but understand, because the smell of what you eat is the most universal sentence ever written. And I drive through Queens with my windows down like I'm reading a book. Every block a different chapter in every language I wish I could speak.
Water's thick enough to walk on almost. A super fun sight playing reluctant host. The paddleboarders in the summer and the ghosts of factories that gave their workers the most creative ways to get sick and still show up. Pour the chemicals and fill the cup of the canal that holds a century of sin, like the confession booth that let everything in. But here's the twist, the $1 million loft looks down on what the EPA calls soft. Hazardous waste, and the irony is rich is the people who moved in above the ditch of mercury and whatever else sits at the bottom of Brooklyn's most poetic rotten autumn. Leaf of a waterway that refuses to die underneath the most gentrified sky. The dirtiest water in the city holds the cleanest mirror. If you're bold enough to look, it shows you what a neighborhood becomes when what was forgotten gets remembered by the wrong people for the right reasons, or the right people for the wrong seasons. Either way, the canal don't care. It was here before the money in the open air. Markets and the artisan cheese, the Gowanus outlasts all of these. The drawbridge opens and I stop the car, the most patient red light by far. A barge of absolutely nothing passes through. The most New York thing you could ever do is sit in traffic for a vessel carrying air across a toxic canal without a care in the world. And somehow that's beautiful, the absurdity of it, the mutual agreement between the bridge and the boat, and the driver in the city's footnote that says sometimes you just have to wait for nothing to pass before you move to something great. The dirtiest water in the city holds the cleanest mirror. If you're bold enough to look, it shows you what a neighborhood becomes when what was forgotten gets remembered by the wrong people for the right reasons, or the right people for the wrong seasons. Either way, the canal don't care. It was here before the money in the open air. Markets and the artisan cheese, the Gowanus outlasts all of these. And there's an honesty in the murk that I can't find anywhere else in this city.
An emerald rectangle dropped in the middle of ambition. 84 acres of the city's best decision to leave something unbuilt in a place that builds on everything. Central Park at midnight doesn't ring. With joggers or with tourists or the horse-drawn carriages, it empties out and drops its disguises and becomes what Olmsted always meant it to be, a breathing space between the you and the me, of 8 million conversations happening at once. I loop the drive when the park goes dark, when the only passengers are the question mark of an owl and the answer of a raccoon beneath the sky too bright to hold the moon properly. Manhattan's light pollution is the park's most beautiful illusion, turning the clouds into a canvas of gold, the most expensive ceiling ever sold. And it's free for those who drive the loop at 2. One loop and the Monday disappears. 2 loops and so do the years. 3 loops and I'm back to something small before the city taught me how to build a wall around the part of me that just wants grass and the sound of nothing but the overpass of wind through the trees that don't apologize for being the only honest things beneath these skies. Bethesda found an angel in the dark, her wings spread wide across the park, like a mother telling everyone to rest. The bow bridge underneath her breast, of stone and water holding still, the reservoir above collecting every hill of rain that falls on this green island within an island, a Russian doll of landscape and silence. The gray lawn is just a field tonight. No concerts, no Shakespeare, no kite, just the grass recovering from the day in the way that all good things recover, slowly and without display. One loop and the Monday disappears. 2 loops and so do the years. 3 loops and I'm back to something small before the city taught me how to build a wall around the part of me that just wants grass and the sound of nothing but the overpass of wind through the trees that don't apologize for being the only honest things beneath these skies. And I always do one more loop than I planned, because the trees don't judge you for needing an extra lap.
$13 for the toll, I know. But have you seen what $13 buys this show? The Narrows open like a curtain call, the Atlantic Ocean standing 10 stories tall, in the distance where the tankers wait to turn, to enter the harbor and to learn the patience of a city that was always part, the first impression and the last resort. From the upper deck at midnight you can see the curvature of everything that's free, the coastline bending like it's trying to hug Staten Island and Brooklyn in one shrug of geography that says I hold you both between my bridges like a wedding oath. From the top of Verrazzano, the world gets bigger and the ego gets smaller. Every car moving prayer, every headlight a flare, sent up from the surface of a city that believes in suspension cables and the things it achieves when it builds across the things that divide. The water, the distance, the wounded pride of boroughs that will promise better connections. The Verrazzano is the only direction that answers with a view like this. Giovanni Verrazzano sailed through here in 15-something and saw nothing but the harbor and the bluffing of a coastline, pretending to be the edge of the world. Now the bridge that bears his name is unfurled. Across the gap he passed through in a wooden boat, and passed through in a Honda with a throat full of coffee and a chest full of the kind of all that only bridges of this size can find. The marathon starts here every November. 100,000 feet that don't remember the cold or the wind, just the starting gun, and the fact that 26 miles is actually fun. When you're too delirious to quit, the Verrazzano is the altar of commit. From the top of Verrazzano, the world gets bigger and the ego gets smaller. Every car moving prayer, every headlight a flare. Sent up from the surface of a city that believes in suspension cables and the things it achieves when it builds across the things that divide. The water, the distance, the wounded pride of boroughs that were promised better connections. The Verrazzano is the only direction that answers with a view like this. And $13 has never felt so much like a bargain. Whoa!
Cobblestones vibrate up through the steering column into my wrist like a Morse code solemn message from the neighborhood's original bones. When Dumbo was a warehouse district, moans of machinery and the smell of coffee being roasted before the word artisanal was ever posted on a chalkboard menu in a converted factory where the rent would make your ancestors' jaws drop satisfactorily. The Manhattan Bridge above me opens its jaw of steel and noise, the most magnificent raw frame for the Empire State Building ever made. You've seen the photo, every tourist ever paid their respects to this particular view. And now I'm driving through it at 1:45 when there's no one here to take the picture but the moon. And the moon is better taste than Instagram's cartoon. Rattle, rattle through the history beneath my tires, past the chocolate factory that still perspires. The smell of cocoa in the wind is right. These stones have felt a million different kinds of night. The kind with horses and the kind with Ubers, the kind with longshoremen, the kind with YouTubers. And they hold each one with the same flat patience of a neighborhood that survived every renovation. Jane's carousel is sleeping in its glass pavilion, a fairground beauty worth a couple million. And preservation grants and the dreams of children who rode the painted horses like they're building memories they'll drive back to in 30 years. Park on these same cobblestones and have the tears of nostalgia for a version of a place that was already nostalgic for its own erase. The original, the Russian dolls of Brooklyn soul, every era containing a smaller hole inside the one that came before. Chocolate factory that still perspires. The smell of cocoa when the wind is right. These stones have felt a million different kinds of night. The kind with horses and the kind with Ubers, the kind with longshoremen, the kind with YouTubers. And they hold each one with the same flat patience of a neighborhood that survived every renovation. And the cobblestones don't care
Robert Moses drew a line through the Bronx in 1948. 60,000 people were displaced. He called it urban renewal. They called it something else. 6 lanes of the most American mistake, carved through a borough for the commuter's sake, who never lived here, never walked these blocks, never heard the music leaking from the box of an apartment that got torn in two, so a highway could connect the people who had the luxury of living somewhere else, while the Bronx was left to fix itself. The potholes now are archaeological, every bump a reminder topological of the neighborhood that used to stand right where my right tire lands, on a piece of asphalt covering the floor of someone's kitchen from 1954. The roughest ride in the roughest town, but the people looking down, down, down. From the overpasses, built above their laws, have a dignity that this highway can't exhaust. Crack concrete beneath, crack policy, but the community rebuilt on top of the atrocity. And that's the most Bronx thing I've ever known. Growing flowers in a war zone. I grip the wheel against the seismic shocks of infrastructure that the city mocks, with every budget that forgets to include the borough that gave birth to every move. Hip-hop was invented 20 blocks from here on Sedgwick Avenue. Cool hurt the pioneer to 2 turntables in the paint of this expressway, and turned it into the most important essay on American culture. Since jazz left the South, the cross Bronx gave the world a mouth. The roughest ride in the roughest town, but the people looking down. From the overpasses, built above their laws, have a dignity that this highway can't exhaust. Crack concrete beneath crack policy, but the community rebuilt on top of the atrocity. And that's the most Bronx thing I've ever known. Growing flowers in a war zone. And my suspension will never forgive this road, but my respect for the Bronx only gets deeper with every pothole. With every pothole, with every pothole, with every pothole.
Plaza spins me round the arch like a waltz between the February and the March of seasons changing in the branches overhead, where the library lions guard the books unread by everyone who promised themselves this year they'd finally finish something without fear of the ending. The park agrees some things are better left to the breeze. Olmsted drew this on a drafty page and gave Brooklyn its center stage, a meadow where the dogs outrun their names and the runners keep their private flames of whatever they're training for alive. 5 a.m. or late at night, the drive around the perimeter is always the same loop, but the driver is never the same. Trees bow down to no one here, not the mayor, not the billionaire. They just grow and shed and grow again, the most democratic citizens. And the lake reflects whatever you bring, your joy, your grief, your everything. The park holds it all without complaint, the way a canvas holds the pain. Shell sits in its repose like an ear that's waiting for the close of winter so the concerts can begin. Fill the long meadow to the brim with blankets and the sound of something live. The zoo is small, but the penguins thrive in a Brooklyn kind of way. Tough and cute, the botanical garden across the street in pursuit of every flower that exists on earth, contained in a greenhouse of extraordinary worth, right next to a highway that's Brooklyn for you. Paradise adjacent to the loud and the crude. Oh, the trees bow down to no one here, not the mayor, not the billionaire. They just grow and shed and grow again, the most democratic citizens. And the lake reflects whatever you bring, your joy, your grief, your everything. The park holds it all without complaint, the way a canvas holds the pain. And I orbit this park like a planet that found its gravity.
12.
Yeah. 12 lanes of the most democratic asphalt, where the boulevard takes nobody's assault. Personally, She just stretches wide from the Queensboro Bridge to the countryside of Eastern Queens, where the houses finally breathe and the driveways are something you can't believe exist this close to Times Square's glow. Queens Boulevard is the longest, I told you so. In municipal history, they called it the Boulevard of Death for a decade before they fixed the crosswalks in the shade of traffic lights from suggestion to command. But at midnight she extends a hand like a queen receiving guests from every nation, the most internationally populated station of the cross in any city on this earth. Every diner, every laundromat, a birth of a new American story being told in Urdu and Tagalog bold. 12 lanes wide, and not one of them pretends to be anything other than a means to the ends of a barrel that carries the city on its back without the credit, without the soundtrack that Manhattan gets for doing half the work. Queens Boulevard smiles at every smirk from the inner boroughs who think they're it, while Queens just quietly runs the whole operation. Rego Park to Forest Hills, the diners never close. The coffee's bad, but everybody knows that's not why you're here at 3 a.m. You're here because the counterman remembers your face from last Tuesday and asks about your mother in a way that's genuine, not algorithmic, not a pitch. Just a human in an apron with a switch on the grill that's been flipped 6 million times. This boulevard runs on those kinds of dimes. Abidani 12 lanes wide, and not one of them pretends to be anything other than a means to the ends of a barrel that carries the city on its back without the credit, without the soundtrack that Manhattan gets for doing half the work. Queens Boulevard smiles at every smirk from the inner boroughs who think they're it, while Queens just quietly runs the whole operation. And I put Queens Boulevard against any street in the world, and bet my last dollar on the diner at the corner. Flirt.
Where the freight trains used to haul the meat, and the flowers now grow between the obsolete rails of a railroad that the city forgot, until some people said, what if we did not tear it down but let it bloom instead? What if the thing we thought was dead was just sleeping underneath the rust, waiting for somebody's trust? I park below and look above at what abandon looks like when it's loved. The wildflowers don't know they're in Manhattan, growing through the steel like a Joseph Bond. And at the rent around and breaks $1,000 per square foot. The flowers are the scholars of a different economy of worth, where a crack in the concrete equals birth. Something left for dead grew petals overhead, taught the city that the cracks aren't what we dread. They're the openings, the invitations, the gardens. Welcome to the patient ones who see a railroad where the will see's done, who see a railroad. This is where the comes in. The packing district down below remembers things that cobblestones still know about the blood and sawdust of the city used before upgrade to breaks and rooftop bars and $50 juice. Debate of who got a facelift with the truth between the fish with a snow. The signs of the green Maybe I'm not real, just waiting for the right schedule.
Three bridges wearing one name, like a trench coat, connecting the boroughs that matter the most to each other. Manhattan, the Bronx, and Queens meet at Randall's Island in between the seams of a city that pretends it's unified, while every borough holds its private pride. Like a hand of cards it won't reveal, the Triborough is the only real conversation between three different lives happening simultaneously, where the FDR arrives at a fork in the road that says choose. Left is the Bronx, where the boom bap brews of 100,000 drum machines still echoes through the housing greens. Right is Queens, where the world applies for citizenship with homemade pies. And straight ahead back to Manhattan's core, where everyone's keeping score. Three forks in the road, three different songs, three boroughs where 3 billion dreams belong. And I circle Randall's Island twice, because choosing once was never my advice to anyone. The best decisions are the ones you make after the second loop, when the sun's not up yet and the toll is paid, and the only consequence is the choice you made. They renamed it for Bobby Kennedy, who knew a thing or two about the bridges between the blue and the broken in this country's chest. The Triborough is his unfinished quest to connect the disconnected, make the distant near. An infrastructure of sincere belief that roads can heal what speeches can't. That asphalt is the final grant of access to the other side of whatever divides us. Three forks in the road, three different songs, three boroughs where 3 billion dreams belong. And I circle Randall's Island twice, because choosing once was never my advice to anyone. The best decisions are the ones you make after the second loop, when the sun's not up yet and the toll is paid, and the only consequence is the choice you made. And tonight I choose all three, I've got the gas for it.
Subway breeze, its final breath of air conditioning and grieves the loss of passengers to the boardwalk and the sand. I drove instead because I like to keep my hand on the wheel when the world gets heavy enough to need the bottom of Brooklyn, where the stuff that weighs you down gets handed to the surf, and the ocean says I know what you're worth. The cyclone skeleton against the winter sky, a roller coaster's way of asking why we stop riding things that scare us once we're grown. The wonder wheel slowly spinning on its own, or maybe that's just the wind at 2 a.m. turning the amusement park into a requiem for every summer that we swore would never end, before September taught us how to bend. At the bottom of Brooklyn, where the land gives up, the boardwalk holds the city's coffee cup of emotions that the avenues won't carry, the confessions that the buildings find too scary. The ocean takes them all without receipt, the most anonymous therapist on the street, and the waves come back with nothing but the foam of a city that forgot it had a home. This far south, this far out, this far real. Nathan's flame is closed and dark, but the ghost of mustard lingers like a reputation that's been flustered by the decade but refuses to retire. A seagull claims the counter like a crier, announcing that the coast is clear for those who need the kind of peace that only shows its face when the amusement park goes quiet, and the only ride available is the riot of stars above Coney Island's crown, the cheapest, most expensive view in town. At the bottom of Brooklyn, where the land gives up, the boardwalk holds the city's coffee cup of emotions that the avenues won't
Nobody writes love songs for this bridge, and that's a shame. She does the same job without half the fame of a neighbor to the south who gets the postcards and the Christmas movies and the playing cards with the photo on the back, the Brooklyn Bridge. Meanwhile, the Williamsburg holds the ridge of the East River together with the same steel bone, just less photogenic in the tourist zones. The J train passes overhead and the whole thing shakes like a dog that's coming in from the rain. It makes you grip the wheel a little tighter than before and appreciate the engineering more than you would on a bridge that doesn't remind you that infrastructure is a promise that can find you anywhere between two boroughs at 2 a.m. when the East River's current is a dark flame of something the city's been processing for years. Not every bridge needs a lover from a poet. Some just need a driver who can show it. The respect of crossing slowly at the hour when the steel is just the steel and the power is just the power lines reflecting in the river. And the beauty is the kind that makes you shiver, not from Instagram but from the actual code of a bridge that never has to be extolled just to be crossed. The Lancey Street feeds into her western jaw, the Lower East Side's most functional raw transition from the grid into the gap of water that no city can unwrap without a bridge. And this one does it plain, no arches, no limestone, just the train and the cars and the bikes and the pedestrians. At 6 a.m. the most egalitarian Panuta, New York, everybody equal on this bridge, regardless of the sequel or the prequel of their story. Not every bridge needs a letter from a poet. Some just need a driver who can show it. The respect of crossing slowly at the hour when the steel is just the steel and the power it's just the power lines reflecting in the river. And the beauty is the kind that makes you shiver, not from Instagram but from the actual code of a bridge that never has to be extolled just to be crossed. So consider this not a love letter but a thank you note from someone who crosses you every week and always makes it home.
Alphabet City, the letters of a last resort that became the letters of a last report from the underground. Before the underground was a brand, when it was just the sound of someone's apartment shaking from the base of a band rehearsing in the basement space beneath the bodega that sold everything from cigarettes to the American dream, and a string of lottery tickets and devotional candles burning for the saints and the neighborhood vandals. A is for the art that couldn't afford the frame. B is for the bars that forgot their names. C is for the courage that it took to stay. D is for the dawn that always found a way through the fire escapes and the broken blinds into the apartments of the broken minds that made the most beautiful things this city ever housed. Wonder is the only speed this neighborhood respects. Anything faster and you'll miss the dialects of punk and poetry and pirogy and pride that live on every single side of every single street that refused to be zoned for anything other than the overgrown wild garden of what happens when you leave a neighborhood long enough to believe in itself. The spinal cord of every counterculture that was never bored enough to go mainstream. The tattoos still buzz at midnight because that's what this street does. The ramen shops have replaced the squats, but the steam still rises like rebellious thoughts from every grate and every kitchen vent. This is where the city's rent was once low enough for the dangerous ones, the ones who changed everything and asked for none of the credit. Parts. Wonder is the only speed this neighborhood respects. Anything faster and
Brooklyn Bridge at 3 a.m. It's the closest thing I have to a requiem for the day that just ended and the one about to start. The upper deck is empty and my heart is somewhere between the cables doing math on everything that led me to this path. 4,000 feet of steel above the Hudson's black. The Palisades on one side like a quarterback, waiting for the snap that never comes, because at 3 a.m. even New Jersey succumbs to sleep. The cables look like harp strings pulled by God, or whoever's in charge of the facade of beauty that exists for no one's benefit. At this hour, no tourist, no permit needed to experience what I'm feeling now, which is small, profoundly and gratefully small, beneath the architecture of a bridge that saw more American dreams cross its law of physics than any Ellis Island speech. At the highest point the wind speaks clear in a language only the lonely hear. It says put down everything you carried here. The bridge is strong enough for you and your fear, and your pride and your doubt, and the list of everything you missed and everything you didn't miss, and everything you almost wish you could do again. And I do, I put it all down on the pavement, drive across a little lighter. The little red lighthouse sits below. From the children's book everyone should know about a lighthouse who felt replaced by the bridge, but learned that small and great can share the ridge of the same riverbank without competing. The most important lesson worth repeating at 3 a.m. when you feel like the lighthouse and the world feels like the bridge. At the highest point the wind speaks clear in a language only the lonely hear. It says put down everything you carried here. The bridge is strong enough for you and your fear, and your pride and your doubt, and the list of everything you missed and everything you didn't miss, and everything you almost wish you could do again. And I do, I put it all down on the pavement, drive across a little lighter, and the drive back to Manhattan always weighs exactly nothing.
Cast iron facades, 5 stories of frozen lace. SoHo at midnight finally drops the face she wears for daytime. The curated, the cool, the neighborhood that turned itself into a school for how to make expensive look effortless, while the fire escapes above confess that this was once a factory district full of sweat, where the garment workers' lunch was all they get, before the galleries discovered that the light that comes through factory windows is the right kind of life for selling paintings at a price that would have fed the floor workers twice. The mannequins on Prince Street stand at attention, dressed in outfits that I won't mention the price of. They stare through the glass at an empty street where nobody will pass for another 6 hours, but they hold the pose. But that's what SoHo teaches you, compose yourself even when no one's watching, especially then. Midnight is the only honest hour here, when the price tags and the shoppers disappear, and the cobblestones can finally exhale and tell their actual tale of iron and industry in the immigrant hands that laid every stone according to plans drawn by someone who never could have dreamt that the loading dock would pay for contemporary art. The most beautiful joke that a neighborhood ever spoke. Broadway cuts through like a river of what was. Before the boutiques came, before the buzz of being SoHo. Man, anything to anyone. It was just south of Houston, a direction, not a destination. And maybe that's what I miss most about this place. The version that didn't have a face on a magazine or a strategy for the weekend crowd. Just midnight is the only honest hour here, when the price tags and the shoppers disappear, and the cobblestones can finally exhale and tell their actual tale of iron and industry, and the immigrant hands that laid every stone according to plans drawn by someone who never could have dreamt that their loading dock would pay for contemporary art. The most beautiful joke that a neighborhood ever spoke. And at midnight, not even the mannequins relax their shoulders.
Brooklyn has a coastline and nobody talks about it. Like a family secret, everyone's too proud to shout it. The Belt Parkway runs along the bottom hem of the borough like a prayer or a phlegm. Of salt water and speed and the occasional sunset that makes you pull over and forget that you live in the city of 8 million voices. Because right here the only choices are the ocean and the road and the pelicans who don't know they're in Brooklyn. Elegance without a zip code, without a broker's fee. The most democratic view you'll ever see. Sheepshead Bay to Brighton Beach, I ride the edge between the houses and the ocean's ledge. My window down in January because the salt is worth the cold. It's nobody's fault that the most beautiful drive in Brooklyn is also the most ignored by everyone except the Coast Guard and the fishermen and the drivers who know that the belt at midnight puts on the show. That Manhattan charges thousands to attend the longest ocean road in town, and nobody writes it down. No postcards, no influencer shots, just the belt connecting dots between the neighborhoods that face the sea and the driver who needs to be somewhere between the sound of the wave and the sound of the engine. A cave of velocity and salt, the only highway without a fault that I actually forgive, because the ocean is where I live. At least at night, at least in spirit, at least when I can hear it. Yeah. The Rockaways across the bay like a dare, a bridge too far for a Wednesday, but the air carries the message that the beach is still alive. Even in December, it survived another year of erosion and debate about the future of a place that won't wait for permission to be beautiful. The longest ocean road in town, and nobody writes it down. No postcards, no influencer shots, just the belt connecting dots between the neighborhoods that face the sea and the driver who needs to be somewhere between the sound of the wave and the sound of the engine. A cave of velocity and salt, the only highway without a fault that I actually forgive, because the ocean is where I live. At least at night, at least in spirit, at least when I can hear it. And the ocean says the same thing every night. Keep driving, I'm not going anywhere.
The highest point in all of Manhattan and the warmest, this hilltop neighborhood is the swarmiest, with music that escapes from every window grate. volume that can't wait for your permission to enter your bloodstream. Washington Heights is a fever dream of plantains frying and the church bells competing with the bass from the Civic's backseat seat and vibrating the whole block like a massage from the neighborhood that doesn't do camouflage. Abuela's window on the 5th floor still lit at midnight because she won't quit. Watching the block like a general at a post. She's seen more change than any coast to coast. I can never recapture every decade a new chapter, but the rice and beans stay exactly the same. The most consistent thing in the city's frame. The highest ground in all Manhattan and the warmest somehow that should matter. In a city that measures value by the view, the Heights has the best one, that's true. And the richest culture per square foot, measured not in what the broker put on the listing, but in what the grandmother put on the table. And that calculation is the only one worth the elevation. Ford Tryon Park in the cloister sit like a medieval plot twist above a Dominican celebration that never ends, where the old world and the new world blends into something that neither Europe nor the Caribbean ever imagined. A mid-Manhattan amphibian of identity that breathes both hemispheres and has for decades through the cheers and the tears of immigration's complicated song. Washington Heights is where they all belong. The ones who came with nothing but the will to make a home on Manhattan's highest hill. The highest ground in all Manhattan and the warmest somehow that should matter. In a city that measures value by the view, the Heights has the best one, that's true. And the richest culture per square foot, measured not in what the broker put on the listing, but in what the grandmother put on the table. And that calculation is the only one worth the elevation. And from the top of the hill you can see the George Washington Bridge, and it looks like it's bowing to the neighborhood that earned it.
I'ma do what I love, I'ma do what I need, I'ma do what I love, 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 I'ma do it, love, love, I'ma do what I love, I'ma do what I need, I'ma do what I love, 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 I'ma do it, love, love, I'ma do it, love.
One final lap around the island's narrow waist. Battery to end with 23 miles, no haste. Just the perimeter, the edge, the frame of the most painted photograph name dropped island in the history of ambition. And tonight, I'm doing my own exhibition of every mile from the FDR to the west side. A circumnavigation of American pride, an American mess in equal portions served on a platter of asphalt that this island deserved. The battery where the ferries dock and sleep, where Wall Streets go still, count their sheep and dividends and derivatives in the deep. Fear that someone somewhere knows the truth, that money is just loneliness in a suit. But the harbor doesn't judge, it holds a statue. And the immigrants and the attitude of a city that said give me everything you got. Every block a different language, every mile a different song. This island's been teaching me all night long how to stay by showing me 100 ways to leave, and I chose none of them. I believe in the loop and the return and the coming back to the same starting point with a different track, playing on the stereo and a different thought about everything I was and everything I'm not. The bridges wave as I go past like neighbors checking in. Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, each one a pin on the map of a city that pretends it's one, but it's actually 5 different versions of the sun. Setting and rising at different times, over different skylines, with different rhymes and rhythms and recipes and reasons to exist. And somehow the whole thing persists in being the most impossible, beautiful experiment that any civilization ever spent its energy on building and rebuilding again. In wood at the top, where the island tapers thin, where the last old growth forest has been standing since before the Dutch, before the trade, before the island became a parade of everything humanity can construct. And here at the tip where the trees conduct the wind like an orchestra, I turn the car around and start the loop again without a sound. Every block
a different language, every mile a different song. This island's been teaching me all night long how to stay by showing me 100 ways to leave, and I chose none of them. I believe in a loop and the return and the coming back to the same starting point with a different track playing on the stereo and a different thought about everything I was and everything I'm not. And the loop begins again, like a heartbeat, because that's what this island is, a heart beating for 8 million people who forgot to check their pulse.
The sky above the East River is blushing now, like it got caught staring at the city somehow. And for the first time since midnight, the noise drops below the level of my own voice, talking to myself about the streets I drove, every borough, every bridge, every treasure trove of a neighborhood that held my attention, like a gallery with free admission. The coffee carts are setting up on Lexington, their steam rising like a benediction over the sidewalks that are still asleep. The pigeons are already running their sweep of the garbage from last night's mistakes, and the city slowly rises and it takes its first breath of the new day like a swimmer, breaking the surface, everything gets dimmer. The street lights yield to the actual sun, and I realize that the night is done. So good night to the bridges that I leaned on, every cable, every bolt I depended on. Good night to the tunnels that kept my whispers, and the potholes that kept me an honest listener. Good night to the skyline that never once let me feel small without making me confront the beauty of being small, of being a single car on an island full of stars. I pull into my parking spot on a street with no name, or rather a name that nobody came to New York to find. A residential block where the trees are older than the sidewalk clock, and the brownstones lean like old friends sharing weight. I turn the engine off and appreciate the silence that is never really silence in this town. It's just the volume being turned down to a hum, the frequency of a city that never sleeps, but sometimes closes its eyes and keeps them shut for just a minute between the shifts of night and day. The most generous gifts the city gives to those of us who drove all night through every shadow and every light. So good night to the bridges that I leaned on, every cable, every bolt I depended on. Good night to the tunnels that kept my whispers, and the potholes that kept me an honest listener. Good night to the skyline that never once let me feel small without making me confront the beauty of being small, of being a single car on an island full of stars. Good night to Brooklyn, who held me first, to Queens, who quenched my deepest thirst for the world in a single borough. Good night to the Bronx, whose thorough baseline started everything we hear. Good night to Staten Island, I'll get to you next year. And good night Manhattan, my most complicated friend, who never lets a good night end without a sunrise that makes you wanna do it all again. And I close my eyes, still hearing the city hum its lullaby, a melody made of sirens and sparrows, of bridge cables and taxi horns, of 8 million alarm clocks about to ring. And I fall asleep smiling, because tonight